Okay. Arriving in the colonial city of Trinidad, Cuba, with its notoriously preserved 18th century architecture, I was struck by something rather odd. After hours of driving from Havana, I stepped out into the gnarled cobblestone streets and felt a surge of memory, an indescribable something that sticks with me even as I write this. Despite its UNESCO World Heritage Site, I knew very little of the town before arriving. Sure, everyone has heard of the pulsing, vibrant energy of Havana, but Trinidad? It seemed like a forgotten place, typically mixed up in casual conversation as a different Caribbean nation. It was a place stuck in time, and very little had been updated over the last several hundred years, save for new coats of paint and minor government-funded restorations. In 2017, I went to Cuba as a journalist. It was a small trip with 5 others, and we toured the island country in a 1960s blue van for 10 days. We stayed in Casa Particulares, local homes similar to Airbnbs run by individual hosts or families. These were a big deal for the local economy, only possible after the death of Fidel Castro. His brother Raul succeeded him, and as the new president of the Communist Party, he was a bit more lenient with small private businesses. Many Cubans, in fact, made more money opening their homes to guests and tourists than at their regular jobs as doctors, engineers, or professors. Since the average monthly salary was equivalent to about $30 US, these private homestays allowed for both extra income and rare glimpses into the outside world as offered by the revolving door of travelers. I put the feeling of unease out of my mind as I entered the home of Elvis and Anna. Both professional engineers with multiple university degrees under their belt, they were welcoming and kind, if not a bit aloof in their demeanor. I sat in the open courtyard in the center of the house, smoking cigarettes and reading the local Cuban newspaper, a treat for an American journalist, while Elvis sat smoking his cigar. Between my baby Spanish and his fragmented English, we managed a few laughs and a few shared secrets in hushed tones. He had been a stark supporter of Fidel and the revolution, but now in his old age, he was beginning to doubt it all. He explained how this new business of opening his Casa Particular brought in more income than he had ever made throughout his entire life. Despite the shifting political tides and renewed hope, there remained in the town a sense of secrecy and sadness. This permeated the air itself and burrowed inside the chest like a dull, humming weight. On the afternoon of our arrival, I asked Elvis for a good spot for dinner. People seem to love la botella. It's a great food, but, he added with a touch of hesitation, it's a bit strange. You'll see when you get there. I didn't know what he meant by those words, but strange and interesting, sure, I'm down. Since it was recommended by the first local we had met in this foreign city, we gathered a small group and went up the cobblestone hill in search of it. As I walked into the restaurant, a feeling of dread and suffocation came over me. It resonated in the walls that had little to do with the tropical heat. On the surface, the restaurant seemed lively, bustling with activity. I was surrounded by new friends and the prospect of a really good meal. What could possibly be bad about this place? After looking at the menu, a bit lightheaded now, I finally took a long look around the dining room and felt a full shudder go through my body. What exactly is that on the walls? I asked our tour guide, a bubbly, free-spirited woman who made it her life's goal to show people Cuba, the Cuba that had been long blocked off for an entire generation of Americans. Apparently, those are torture devices, she said. They were used on the slaves brought here years ago. Trinidad was a major port city. Suddenly, my brief research from weeks prior came back to me. Trinidad was one of the biggest port cities in the Caribbean, known for their sugarcane and tobacco plantations, and that meant it was also the site of unfathomable atrocities during the transatlantic slave trade. Their main import, human beings. Why would these items be on full display as if they were trophies? Shouldn't they be stored away, covered up, or at the very least set behind a glass in a museum somewhere as a reminder that history should not and would not repeat itself? not as mere relics or tchotchkes used as decor in an eating establishment in the year 2017. I thought of the whitewashing of our own history in my country, and how in the United States we paint over, both literally and figuratively, the ugly, gruesome, terrifying parts of our past. But here in Cuba, that history is propped up as a reminder, as if to say, yes, pain, horrible pain, is also part of our story. I hurriedly ate the remnants of my meal and breathed a sigh of relief when the check came. I left the table in a hurry, eager for the fresh air and the promise of a cigarette, and walked ahead of the group. The restaurant was perched on top of a hill lined with those deep cobblestones I mentioned earlier. Walking back down the hill after our meal, I had a vision. It came as clear as day and was connected with the same feeling I had when I stepped out from the van for the first time hours before. I saw the street underneath me clearly, but I saw it was paved with bones, actual human bones stretching down the length of the entire road. And then in an instant, the vision was gone. The streets were paved with bones. That's it. Either this town is haunted or I'm officially going nuts, I thought. So I decided to keep my vision to myself, in case the latter may be true. I didn't want to scare away my new traveling companions, after all, and despite the choice of decor in the restaurant, we had a good meal. We were having a good time on the Strip. There was no need to ruin it with an intuitive, wacky vision, for God's sake, especially among strangers. The next day, we embarked on an architectural tour around the city, led by a local man named Tom. Tom had lived in the town his entire life and only spoke Spanish. Standing on the street corner with him under the blazing mid-morning sun, he began his walking tour of his hometown with a statement that nearly made my knees buckle from under me. They say this town is cursed, that it is haunted. They say the city streets are paved with the bones of slaves under these cobblestones. If you're like me and Spanish isn't your first language, it took me a second or two for his words to sink in. I turned to my traveling companion and asked her, "What did he just say?" He said, she repeated it verbatim. I had understood him correctly. The haunted feeling wasn't just me, after all. The town of Trinidad ached and groaned even with the weight of its history, and it was powerful. Powerful enough for me to feel it. Powerful enough to speak to me, to speak through me. It was a vision of the lives claimed by the slave trade. The horror of greed and bloodshed, the horror of man, as if to say, look what has happened here. Here's where their bones lay, deep within the earth. Look what mankind has done. I walked under the August heat with a headache, self-conscious, groaning like Walt Whitman in his supermarket. Pig heads, bloodied and blank-eyed, were hung on spikes outside shops. Dust circled the air. Paint pigment glowed like neon in the sun. Something had brought me here. Something wanted me to come to this town. Something that I didn't understand until later. But the city wasn't done with its stories. It had something else to show me too, and it wanted its story to be told. Thank you very much.